Chloe, so lovely to have you here on the podcast with me this morning. I follow your work on Instagram. I'm a big fan, and I obviously I know you from it was a couple of years ago now that you did my healing birth practitioner training, and it has been such a buzz watching you go on this beautiful, growthful, healing journey, learning journey, and also now kind of teaching journey. Like you're sharing a lot of what you've learned with your followers, I guess, your community, and it's and this is another example of that, I guess, you coming on the podcast and sharing about how you have gone from here, from a less than ideal start to your mothering journey to where you're at now. And yours is a bit of a different kind of episode that we're doing. Usually I have people share their stories of kind of having a traumatic start to motherhood, a traumatic first birth experience, then doing some work, finding some healing, and that kind of culminating in this really amazing, empowering, healing birth experience. You have yet to give birth again. And so what I love about this episode is that I know that you've done so much of that healing work already in the lead up to your next birth. And so without even you having given birth again yet, I can already, fully see that this next experience is just going to be whoop, whoop, epic when it happens. And yeah, let's get you back on the podcast after your next birth as well. But for today, I'm looking forward to you sharing with us about your journey into motherhood and the path you've taken since then to get to where you're at now. So welcome, and let's just get straight into it and have you share about your first pregnancy, what you envisaged for your birth, the sort of preparation you did in the lead up to that birth, and how that all unfolded for you.
Hi, Carla. Oh, thank you so much for inviting me on to share my story. It's interesting that you made that comment about most of the women, all of the women on this podcast have their traumatic birth and go on to have a healing birth. And I was thinking about this the other day. Oh, I haven't had my healing birth yet, but you're so right that I feel like I've been focusing on that healing before conception, before pregnancy, before birth, so that I didn't have to put pressure on myself, to make that birth my savior. Like, I want to go into that knowing that I'm already doing the work and done the bulk of the healing. So yeah, interesting. Okay, so my first birth pregnancy experience, I'm a mother of one so far. My daughter is 2.5. She was planned, so I'm in a relationship with her father, and we decided that we were ready to, begin the journey to conception. The first time round, I really did everything by the book. And so what did that look like? We decided that we were ready to conceive. I was on the pill, much to my, I'm not even sure what the right word is, disappointment. That wasn't the choice that I wanted to make. Having been not on the pill for years and years. And when I met my partner and we, became official and serious, I vividly remember having this conversation with my mum, and I said, I want to track my cycle and avoid pregnancy that way. And I don't remember her exact words, but she suggested that was not sensible. And so I went on the pill because I thought, I don't want to get pregnant before I'm ready. And even though it wasn't what I wanted to do, I did it. This really paints the picture for my whole life, up until very recent.
I want to know why you didn't want to go on the pill. I mean, I know why, but I would like for you to share that. Yeah.
Sure. I got prescribed the hormonal contraceptive pill when I was about 16 or 17. So living in England at the time. And I know this was really common practice for girls around that age there. I'm not sure if it's the same in New Zealand because I didn't live that stage of my life here. But I had really heavy bleeds, a lot of pain around my bleeding time. I suspect I was also quite an emotional, volatile human. And so the pill was this like, oh, this will sort you out, go on the pill and all your problems will disappear. And I'm not really sure how long I was on the pill for at that time, a few years, but I decided to come off it when I realized that I didn't need it for contraception because anyone that I was having sex with, I would use a barrier contraception, and I didn't feel it was relevant. So I guess I was in my early 20s, maybe 20-ish, when I stopped taking the pill, and I formed more of a relationship with my cycle, but truthfully not really. That came much later. But I'd done reading and I was aware of the sort of side effects, and I guess the fact that the pill wasn't the only form of contraception. And I didn't like the idea of altering my body's natural rhythm. My body naturally does this thing of cycling, and I'm going to stop that so that I don't get pregnant. Like, it just didn't really make sense to me that that was the only option. But then my mum, she's my mum and I'm a girl, and I held her opinion in high regard. And I didn't want a baby, when I first met my partner. Especially, being in a different country from my home, and my visa was, up in the air. I just thought, gosh, this is the last thing I need. So yeah, reluctantly took the pill. I think it was a year that I took it before we decided that we were going to try to conceive. So yeah, as I was saying, everything was very by the book. I'd read that you needed at least 3 months off the pill before you tried to conceive. So, I stopped taking it at this date and started taking a prenatal and stopped drinking alcohol and stopped drinking coffee. And, we didn't try for 3 months because I wanted my body to be in this optimum state. And certainly there are aspects of that I look back and I think, oh, I'm glad that I did that. But it was very formulaic, regimental, structured. If there'd been a moment where I'd thought, oh, I'm ready to conceive, if that hadn't fit into my 3-month plan, it wasn't going to happen. I wasn't listening to anything that my body might have been telling me. So the months came where 3 months was up and we decided to have sex all the time, basically. And I conceived. The story of how I found out I was pregnant, I look back at this now and I just think it was such a beacon for what was to come. But at the time, I didn't know that at all. So I was tracking my cycle, and I was getting to like day 27, 28, feeling really bloated, really grumpy, kind of crampy. And I just assumed it was my bleed, coming. And it didn't come. And I remember we were actually away for the weekend, and I just spent this whole weekend just like, oh, why am I here? I'm just so grumpy, and where's my bleed? And I just want to be at home. And then we got back home and I started to get these really intense abdominal cramps. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I've got endometriosis that I didn't know about because I've been on the pill, or I've got ovarian cysts, or I've got, something's wrong with my body, because I just was so detached. My instant response was like, I'm dying. And this went on for maybe 2 or 3 days. And I was up in the night, you know, in the kitchen, like bending over, just in excruciating pain, thinking, what is going on? And I went to the doctor, and I said, I've got these terrible pains in my tummy. And he, you know, without asking any other questions, he was like, I think you're constipated. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, have you even asked me if I'm pooing? You know, like, I felt so kind of I ignored, like not taken seriously. Anyway, and then he said, oh well, I'll do a quick ultrasound of your tummy just to check that there's no tissues or bleeding, or bearing in mind he's a GP, like he's not an ultrasound specialist. He said, well, just check there's no baby. And I said, if there's a baby in there, I'm on day 30 of my cycle and I conceived on day 14. Like, you're not going to be able to see anything. This is not a way of telling me if I am or am not pregnant. He did the scan. Oh no, there's no baby in there. And I was like, because it's not a baby yet. Like, I just told you that. Anyway, so he said he prescribed me some laxatives, and I was like, I can poo. Like, what are you talking about? And then just as I was about to walk out the door, he said, oh, we better just do a urine sample, you know, just to rule out a couple of other things. I think I was already crying because I just felt so belittled.
Yeah. Unseen.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the nurse came out of the lab room and went, oh, Chloe, you're pregnant. And I was just like, this is such an emotional roller coaster. So then I really was crying. And I said to her, you know, I'm not upset about the pregnancy, but this has just been a really stressful experience, being told that I'm not pregnant and that I can't poo, even though I can poo. And like, no one's listening to my needs. So that was how I found out that I was pregnant, which really paved the way for the whole rest of the experience in hindsight. And if I had been listening to the messages from the universe and listening to my own body, then I would have known that, but I didn't, and I wouldn't be here telling this story. So the rest of my pregnancy, fairly, by the book. I found a midwife early on because I'd been told that was something you had to do as soon as you found out you were pregnant. And I'm pretty sure there was only one midwife available one midwife who could take me on for the birth. And I remember thinking, I'm 4 weeks pregnant and everyone else is booked. Like, how can people know that they're pregnant before they're even pregnant and book these midwives? Like, this is insane. And so I booked this midwife, and I think I knew of a couple of other women who had her as their midwives, and I felt quite happy, you know, albeit she was the only one available. I felt quite happy with her. And
were you planning to birth in hospital at this stage?
At this stage, I was thinking about the birth center. I knew I didn't want to birth in hospital, and I had toyed with the idea in my mind of home birth, but I didn't know anyone else who had ever given birth at home. And I don't even know really where the idea of home birth had come from, because at this stage I wasn't as birth obsessed. I certainly wasn't following birth accounts. You know, I wasn't seeing home birth, so I don't know where that seed even came from. But the fact that no one else had done it, I thought, there must be a reason why people don't do it. And I did know that my mum had wanted to have a home birth with me and hadn't. And I can't exactly remember the reason why. I'm not sure if it's because she went into labor early, or if there was another reason. She has told me, but it's not stuck in my mind. But she had wanted a home birth and had ended up having hospital birth with me. And then with my younger brother, because she'd had a hospital birth, she was told she shouldn't try for a home birth and should just give birth in hospital again. So that was my kind of ancestral story, I suppose, with regards birth. Yeah, so I was planning to birth at the birth center, which is about an hour away from where we live. And this midwife was fully supportive of that. I knew that she had attended home births. And again, it's interesting to me when I look back, I mentioned to her a few times, oh, I thought about a home birth, but I'm not really sure. And she never pressed that. She never kind of asked me to expand on it or entertained the idea. And again, looking back, I think if she truly believed in birth and knew the power of a home birth, she may have not pushed it, but like encouraged the conversation. But I also know now that a home birth requires 2 midwives present, and it's just probably not as easy for them to do. So the fact that I wasn't dead set on it probably just made her life easier. Yeah, so planning for a birth center birth, and I did all the normal things at the appointments, peed on the little bits of paper, and I had the blood test, and I did the gestational diabetes test, and I just had the ultrasounds. I didn't have the early one because I didn't see the point and we didn't find out gender, but I had the ultrasounds and it never crossed my mind not to. And I felt really comfortable. I felt really safe. I trusted my midwife. I felt happy with my decision to birth at the birth center. I have to say, and I haven't ever shared this before because I feel a lot of shame now about my choices around vaccination. And if I made those choices now, they would be different. But I went to have a jab during my pregnancy at some stage, and I don't even remember what it was. And there was a doctor there who wasn't the normal GP. She was in, standing in or whatever. And I was visibly pregnant, and she asked me about where I was going to birth. And I said, I'm going to birth at Charlotte Jean at the birth center. I really liked the idea of a home birth, but as it's my first, I just thought I'd better be safe. Oh God, I just get frustrated at that now. Oh, I better be safe and birth at the birth center. And she said, oh my goodness, you couldn't possibly have a home birth for your first birth. That's a ridiculous idea. That's so dangerous. And again, now I would have responded so differently, but I just froze. I was like, I don't agree with what you're saying, but I'm not a strong enough person to do anything about it. And that was kind of the response I got whenever I mentioned the idea of home birth. It was like this crazy notion.
Why would you do something so irresponsible?
Yeah. Yeah. And at that stage, if this isn't clear already, to the people listening, I was very much in the hands of the system. Like, I truly believed that the system was there to keep me safe, and I trusted the system, and I trusted medical professionals, and I thought that they knew more than me, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so planning to birth at the birth center. Pregnancy was all fine and comfortable, and I really enjoyed being pregnant. I really, really, really enjoyed it. I felt the most incredibly beautiful and powerful that I'd ever felt in my life. And as I got towards the end of my pregnancy, people would say, oh, you'll be so glad it's over, or like, you'll be glad to get that baby out. And I was like, no, I'm so sad. I want to have the baby and be pregnant. I'm really loving this. Oh yeah, baby in my tummy. And yeah, I just felt really at peace with the idea of giving birth. I knew that I could do it. My midwife had, repeatedly said things like, your body was designed to give birth, and you come from a long line of women who can birth, and like, you won't have any trouble, and this is what your body's meant to do. And I just felt really sure of that. So I do remember that a good friend of my partner's, his wife, was due to have a baby maybe a month before us, and she had the same midwife, and she ended up going a little bit earlier than she thought, and we went round to see them while I was still pregnant, so she had this newborn. And that was a really valuable experience for me, because she shared her birth story and she told me some things that I just had no idea about. And I think just having that little bit of forewarning on a few things was quite handy.
Do you want to give us some examples of, if you recall? Yeah. And also, did you do like sort of standard antenatal classes or anything like that?
So one of the things she told me, which was not really specifically relevant to birth, but I remember her saying that after the baby's born and your body is empty, when you try and stand up, you've got no strength or coordination. Like, your body is kind of just jelly. And no one had ever told me that. You know, I just didn't know anything about birth. I didn't know anything. So my confidence and my calmness really came from a place of naivety and ignorance. And I will also say that my partner is a farmer and I was a farmer. And so we'd both seen birth, you know, thousands of times. And I think, you know, on the one hand, that was great. I knew that neither of us would be squeamish and we'd be able to handle it. But it sort of lulled us both into this false sense of security. Like, oh, we've seen it so many times and it's so straightforward, you know, most of the time. And sometimes we have to help. But even then, you know, the animals just get up and do their thing and it's pretty easy. So, yeah, there was that part of my conditioning, I suppose. And in terms of training or antenatal classes, yeah, I do remember my midwife saying, "Are you going to do antenatal classes?" And I was like, "No, I don't need to know anything about birth or about looking after a baby." And she said, "Yeah, fair enough. I think when you live in a big town or a big city, it's nice to meet other women who are going to be birthing at the same time as you. But because we live in a very small rural community, you know, I knew everyone who was pregnant or had had a baby or was having a baby. So we didn't do any antenatal training. I did an online kind of hypnobirthing course that's quite well known in New Zealand for New Zealand parents. And, you know, I paid for it and we watched some of it together, and we didn't get very far through it because I just remember thinking, this isn't serving me. Like, this isn't the information that I need. This isn't making me feel like I'm going into this experience knowing any more. Perhaps it helped with a few of the notions around like what order things might happen, or like things that might happen to your body, phases that you might go through, but in terms of dealing with what was happening, like, it just didn't resonate at all. So yeah, I guess I went in fairly blind but confident. And I remember thinking in the days as I kind of approached my due date, which I knew wasn't a fixed thing, that it was really weird knowing that I was pregnant and then at any second it could all start. And I used to say to my partner, like, "Oh, it could be now. Oh, it could be now. Oh, no, it's not." Or, you know, we'd go to bed and I'd be like, "Oh, is this going to be the night?" And so we went to bed one evening. It was a Sunday. Oh, and I do remember that we were planning on having sex, because I said this could be one of the last days that we have sex because we're going to have a baby, and then I'm, you know, and as
I'm never going to want to have sex again.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And as I got into bed, I just felt this like wetness, and I was like, "Oh, we're not having sex." And I kind of stood there for a bit and was like, have I peed myself? Is it just discharge? Is it just a moment? Like, oh no, it's still coming. And I kind of shuffled to the bathroom. I didn't know what to do. And I remember like getting into the bath and pulling my undies down and standing there and just watching this fluid like coming out. My partner came in, he was looking, and I was like, what are we doing? Like, I was so clueless and so yeah, emotional about it all, and just like not at all prepared, like so not grounded or yeah. Anyway, so I think I texted my midwife, or maybe I phoned her and just said, because I had no idea, you know, I thought she's got to drive from 40 minutes away to get to us. And I just thought this could be one of those things that happens really fast, or it might not. And I just wanted her to know that something might be happening. So that was fine. Went to bed. I don't think I was in bed for very long because I got pretty regular and what I thought were quite intense contractions from the get-go. So at some stage I got up, and then time does that thing where you don't really know what time it is, but my partner lit the fire and we just kind of chilled in the lounge of a house we were renting at the time, which was, it was comfy and it was cozy, but it was it had a kind of like student feel, you know, like a flatting, it had no soul to it. It was just, it was nice and I was happy and I was comfortable, but it didn't feel like really cozy, homey. Anyway, so labored there and kind of watched some series that we'd been watching on Netflix and had the fire and I had my ball and I was just trying to get comfy. And I think the midwife came in the morning after we woke up, just really for peace of mind and just, you know, my peace of mind, her peace of mind, I don't know whose peace of mind. So she could see how I was, and she didn't do anything while she was there. She just sat and watched a few contractions, and she'd said that beforehand. She said, you know, like, I'm gonna be hands off, like I will just sit back and see what's happening, and that's all we need. And then she left and we carried on the day like that, not really doing anything. And I slept on the sofa for a little bit and I kept throwing up and I had diarrhea, and I knew about the diarrhea. My mum had told me about that. She said, I vividly remember when I went into labor, my body just expelled everything. So I was glad I'd been told that too. Yeah, and I ate cream cheese on rice cakes and I probably couldn't eat them now if you paid me because they just kept coming back up. I do remember at one point, and again, this now is just so clear to me, my mother-in-law, so my partner's mum, came round to the house and she knew I was in labor because he'd messaged to say, you know, I can't do my farm jobs or whatever, can you feed the dogs? And I don't know if I'd been in the toilet and I came out and she was there, and I was just mortified, like, that she was there. So I should say at this point, my partner and I had been together maybe two or three, 2.5 years, something like that. So I knew her, but I didn't know her intimately. You know, she'd never seen me in a vulnerable state, and I felt so vulnerable, and I felt like I had to pretend that I was okay, even though I was having these contractions. And what I wanted to say was like, get the fuck out of my house. But I didn't have the ability to use those words. And she wasn't there for long, but that was like oh, someone's in my space that I don't want, but I didn't know how to communicate that. And at some stage I had a shower, and yeah, the day just kind of carried on, and the contractions, I was like, are these ever gonna end? They just felt like they were getting closer and closer and more intense. And I actually wrote down in my cycle tracking journal, which I found the other day and I hadn't read this, that just before we left the house to go to the birth center, I wrote, every contraction I feel like my body is splitting in half. Like my pelvis is just breaking. And it's funny because I don't remember it being that intense before we left the house. I thought that intensity came much later. So that's interesting that that's the moment we decided to leave the house. So the birth center is about an hour away if you drive at speed limit. And we'd gone through this Monday day, and I remember thinking, I'm going to give birth overnight and I don't want to be driving there in the dark. So we need to go before, night comes. This was in November, so it was summer, light evenings. And I got Liam, my partner, to contact the midwife and say, like, we're going to come this evening, even though we don't feel like birth is imminent. We want to be there and like have a chance to settle in. And I knew that my body would probably go backwards, with that change of place and change of safety. So I remember poor Liam, he was packing the car, and he would have to like run out with a load of stuff and be back in time for my next contraction, because I needed him to hold my pelvis, and otherwise I just felt like I was going to die, if he wasn't there for a contraction. So he was in and out trying to pack the car and support me, and we got in the car, and oh my gosh, I would never ever inflict that on anyone traveling in a car in like what I thought at the time was quite intense labor. And I remember saying to him, just keep driving. Like, I don't care if I'm having a contraction and I'm screaming. If you stop, it's going to take us longer to get there, and I just want to get there. Well, we cancelled that plan after the first contraction when I was like, stop the car. Oh, and I remember it was raining, and he would pull over, like throw the car off the road wherever I screamed, and I would wind the window down and have this rain on my face, and I was just screaming into the paddocks, like into the farms as we were driving past, and then we'd go again, and I'm pretty sure we stopped 8 or 10 times on that drive, and he said he did it in 40 minutes, which it is not a 40-minute drive. But that's kind of like, that's where we were with the contractions. And we got to the birth center, and I'd never been there before, and I didn't know. I only found out afterwards that you can book, like you can go and see it, when you're pregnant, you can go and have a look round, and I didn't do that. So we arrived there, we didn't know how to get in because the door is not very obvious, and I got out of the car, and I was just in so much pain, and a lot of it was definitely emotional pain, and I didn't know how to get in, and I was just in the kind of car parky bit having this contraction, and we got in and they showed us into the birthing suite, and my heart just dropped. I was like, oh no, like I don't want to be here. This is not what I signed up for at all. And I think I thought it was going to just be more like a room, more like a home, more, I don't know. And we went in, and there's like a hospital bed, and there's the resuscitation machine, and yeah, there was this great big pool. It was really nice, but I was like, this is like being in a hospital. This is not what I wanted. And again, it didn't cross my mind at that point that I could have got back in. Now I would get back in the car, like I would tolerate that drive 5 times over to not have to stay in that room. But that it was like I'd signed a contract, like this is where I will give birth and I must stay here. So we got settled in, like it was a hotel, the time of our lives. I took the clock off the wall, and I tried to kind of make it less bleh. And I don't remember how long we'd been there, but I remember at some stage I was like, can I just get in the pool? And I think that was an attempt to make myself feel safe. Like, well, if I'm in this pool, like no one can touch me or get to me, and I can do my own thing. And I desperately wanted to be naked, and I was having to wear all these clothes, and I was like, just get me in the water. And I'm pretty sure I spent most of the night in the pool, which again, in hindsight, was probably not that productive or constructive or helpful, but it was where I felt safe. And
it probably was, actually.
Oh, well, I mean, yes, maybe it was. But Yeah, so what were we
You
now?
felt safer, right? Like it doesn't, I mean, yeah, I'm kind of intrigued with you saying before you left that you described what you'd read in your journal about it being intense and like so clearly I thought that I was in pretty intense labor then. And you see something like, well, you know, or so I thought, sort of as if to imply that what we're going to hear is that you learned that you weren't as far along as you thought you were. Well, in my mind, you may well have been well progressed before you left your house. But, you know, cervixes and bodies close up when they stop feeling safe. And how you described your car journey and your despair at what the space was like that you were going to, that you'd signed up to give birth in was, you know, so far removed from what you needed. Well, your body is going to respond to that. And another comment you made as well, and respond negatively to that, I should add, you know, like it's not going to want to continue to open up and let go of your baby if you're feeling unsafe and you're, you know, it's, yeah. Another thing that you said was you talked about the pain you experienced in the car, and you said, you know, which a lot of it was emotional pain. And I'm sort of thinking, well, kind of one and the same. You know, if you are your emotional body, your mind is so intimately connected with your physiology, with what's happening physically in your body, that when we are feeling distressed, when we're feeling scared, when we're feeling overwhelmed, or any of those feelings, that's going to create more physical tension in the body, which is going to create more pain. So your emotional pain is your physical pain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Carla, for pointing that out, because I think when you live the experience yourself, sometimes it's hard to see it. You know, I know that about other people's births, and I listen to other people's births, and I think, oh, that's because of blah blah blah. And it's really different when you yeah, reflect that onto your own experience. Yes, you're absolutely right. Of course you're right. You've heard a lot of these stories. Yeah, I think I was surprised because so many women I knew had gone from home to the birth center or hospital and given birth. I just expected that I would be able to do that. You know, that I would be able.
This linear process, right? That just starts off with nothing, no contractions, builds and culminates in baby being born, and the cervix just, you know, like is going to open up kind of, you know, in a linear fashion, and baby's going to come down and out, and you know, it's all going to follow this sequence that you've been taught or have learned through one way or another is supposed to happen.
Yeah, and it hadn't crossed my mind that, you know, I thought, well, if other people feel safe going to the hospital or birth center and their labor didn't go backwards, you know, it didn't cross my mind that my body would respond differently because I am my own person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so where were we? My waters broke Sunday evening. Monday evening, we went to the birth center. I sat in the pool until Tuesday morning. And I remember feeling really distressed throughout the time that we were at the birth center that my midwife wasn't there. She was in a room next door, like an office type room where I think they just nap and do, you know, chill. And I know she had done that intentionally to give us space, like to allow me to feel safe, but I wanted her there. And I, again, was not able to easily verbalize that. And I do remember at one point saying to my partner, like, you have got to go and get her. I can't do this without her here. And again, that's really interesting now, you know, looking back. I definitely put my trust and my safety and my sort of my ability in the hands of other people. You know, even when I think back to having to have Liam there and then having to have the midwife there, like, I had no trust in myself. And yeah, I felt really chilled and calm and confident about birth because I'd put everything in the hands of other people. And at it's a few things coming back to me now. I had vividly, explicitly said that I didn't want any gas and air, and I didn't want any vaginal examinations. And as soon as we got to the birth center, my midwife gave me the gas and air because she said, like, you look like you need to kind of calm down and this will help. And then I do remember at one point in that night while we were at the birth center, because it just felt like I was going to be in labor for the rest of my life, I said, can you please, you know, tell me what's going on in my vagina? I don't even remember what she said, but I remember feeling disappointed and thinking, like, I actually am going to die in labor. Like, this is going to be the rest of my life in labor, which was, yeah, foolish. So we got to Tuesday morning, and sorry, my cat has just come in.
I can't hear the cat.
Got to Tuesday morning, and I think I got the feeling that my pelvis was going to break in half again, and that I was going to poo myself, which, even though I knew was a thing that happened and not to be ashamed of, I felt this deep shame that I was going to poo in the pool. And I remember kneeling up, you know, on the side of the pool, and I was like, I think I'm going to poo. And the midwife was like, no, you're not. And even if you do, like, it's fine. It doesn't matter. And she said, you know, if you feel like you want to push, you can push. And I think I did push, and just nothing, like, there was no change in sensation. And I can't remember, but my midwife must have felt, I don't know if I got out of the pool or I don't know what happened, but I remember her saying, like, if you put your fingers there, you can feel the baby's head. And I could, like, put my fingers just inside my vagina and feel the top of this baby's head. I was like, oh, thank God, like, we're getting there. And then she said, it might help if you do a wee, because, you know, if your bladder's full, it might be obstructing. And I sat on the toilet and I needed a wee and I couldn't wee. And again, it's because I'd been in the pool, sipping at this water, needing a wee in the pool and not doing anything about it. And so I couldn't wee. And she said, well, I'll put a catheter if you want, because we need to get that wee out. So she put a catheter in, and the bag of wee just, like, filled instantly. Like, it was a lot of wee. And I'm not sure if it was before or after that I was standing in the room, and there, like, I was still leaking fluid, and there was some meconium in the fluid. And I hadn't really heard of that. I knew that sometimes babies came out and they had poo on them, but I didn't know anything. And she said, I think that you need to transfer to hospital. And I was so tired by that point and so drained and stressed from the whole experience that I was just like, yeah, like, I can't do this, you know, I suck and I can't push this baby out. And, you know, clearly you think there's a safety concern, and so I've got to go to hospital. So I had this, she left the catheter in because she said that in the transfer I wouldn't be able to go to the toilet, so that was the best way to, like, keep me able to wee. And because of where we live rurally, the hospital is really far away, so she I would have to transfer by helicopter. I'd never been in a helicopter before. I'm petrified of heights. And she said, no one can go with you. So I can't come with you and your partner can't go with you. And at this point I was like, oh wow, I actually am going to die in childbirth. Like, I was being dramatic, 4 hours ago, but now I really am going to die having this baby. And so we were like packing my stuff up, but we knew we were going to come back there to stay after the baby had been born for a couple of nights. So some things we left there, and it was all, quite like chaotic. And I was definitely like, I was in my brain at that point. I'd gone through, I remember at one point saying to my partner, I can't do this. And my brain was like, this is transition. And I said to him, I can do this. I am doing this. And then I had this clarity. So I was so back in my body, like, I guess in that ready to meet your baby part of birth. And so I was very, very aware of everything that was happening at this stage. And so she had to phone, I had to get an ambulance transfer to the helipad and then the helicopter. So she went with me in the ambulance to the helipad, and my partner left the birth center, bearing in mind he's now been awake. It's Tuesday morning and he's been awake since Sunday night. And he's not an emotional person. We are, like, I'm a water sign, I'm a Pisces, he's a Virgo, he's earthy and grounded, and he doesn't express emotion. And I remember looking, this will make me cry, looking in his eyes as he left the birth center, and he had so much emotion in his eyes. And I remember thinking, like, I don't know if I'm going to see him again. And if I do, he's going to miss this birth. And it just was awful. And so he got in the car and drove. I mean, I didn't know this, but he drove home, and got his mum to drive him to the next hour and a half to the hospital, because I'm sure he wasn't in a state to drive. And I went in the ambulance with the midwife. And the ambulance was an opportunity for me, or for us, to kind of talk about all the things I didn't want to happen at the hospital. Like, my worst nightmare was a C-section. Like, that was just the absolute, like, last, I just didn't want it to happen at all. And I remember saying to her in the ambulance, like, are they going to make me have a C-section? Because I don't want one. And she was like, I don't, the baby's in your vagina. Like, I don't think you'll be having a C-section. But she said, make sure that you advocate for yourself. And I felt kind of reassured by this. But in hindsight, I was like, how can you advocate for yourself in hospital when you're the one, like, there is no self-advocation. Anyway, and she was saying, you don't have to have anything you don't consent to, and if you're not sure about something, ask. And I was like, oh, okay, this will be fine. Like, we'll get to the hospital and we'll have nice conversations and people will listen to me and la la la. And we got to the helipad, and I was in my dressing gown, like, covered in wee and blood and water, and like, I felt such a state. And I felt shame again. The helicopter pilots were there, and I just remember thinking, they're going to think I'm such a mess, like, such a mess of a person. And so they brought the bed out of the helicopter, and I got onto the bed out of the helicopter, and they strapped me onto it. And I still had this catheter, which was just a logistical nightmare, trying to move this bag of wee around that was attached to me. And then they wheeled me into the helicopter, and I had to wear a face mask because it was what year it was. COVID was still, like, in the periphery. So I had this mask on, and they put some I guess, like heart rate monitors on my fingers and thumbs. So I'm like strapped to the bed, my baby's head in my vagina, can't breathe, scared to death of heights, thinking I'm going to die. And I think there were two pilots in the front, so they were behind my head. And then this young, God, he was young, this young guy sitting with me, wearing a mask and obviously a headset and whatever. And I could see the fear in his eyes at having to watch me, like, going through this experience. And at one point I had a contraction and I just like ripped these bloody things off my fingers and took my mask off and just screamed in the helicopter. And I heard the pilot in my headset, he was like, do I need to make an emergency landing? And I looked out, I had enough awareness, I looked out the window and I could see the city, and I was like, no, like, we're there, like, just get me to this hospital. And we landed on the helipad. Anyone who's listening to this who knows Dunedin and knows Dunedin Hospital, the helipad like hangs over the edge of the building. And we landed and they opened the back of the helicopter and wheel me out on the bed. And I was like, I'm going to fall off the edge of the building. Like, it was horrifying. And then there's this guy who, I don't know, he came out of the kind of lift thing, and I don't know if he was maintenance, but he obviously knew the pilots because they come in and out all the time, and they're just having a chat like, oh, how have you been, blah blah blah. And I was like, get me into this delivery room, like, are you joking? What? Just get me in there. Eventually get me into this room, which is just the shittest room. Like, how anyone is meant to give birth and feel inspired in one of those rooms is beyond me. It was like being in a prison. It was awful. And the midwife was really friendly, and she got me on the bed and she was like, I said, I need to take my clothes off. I can't do this. I've got to be naked. Got on the bed and she's like, okay, I'm just going to put this heart rate monitor on here and blah, blah, blah. And then she must have left the room and I had a contraction and I just like took it all off and was standing on the floor, holding onto the bed, like, she was like, oh, okay, so we don't like being on the bed. Okay, I can use these portable heart rate monitors and la la la. And she, at that stage, what I wanted was for someone to take over. Like, I felt like I had so little control that I actually remember feeling so grateful that this midwife was there and she was going to tell me what to do, because I was like, well, I can't do it. And I remember her saying, let's try kneeling on the, like, I'll lift the back of the bed up and you kneel and like push. And she said to me, you're pushing so well. I don't know where this baby is. Like, why isn't this baby coming out? And someone else, again, hazy order of events, I'm not sure if it was there was a woman and there was a man, and I'm not sure which did what, but someone came in and felt inside my vagina and was like, oh, there's a hand there. I was like, what are you talking about? Babies, like, that's not how babies come out. They come out head first. And they like pushed this hand back in and were like, oh, there you go. And I do remember thinking, shit, if we'd done that at the birth center, I wouldn't have had to come here in that bloody helicopter. Maybe that was the problem. Anyway, so carried on pushing, and whoever said, if we don't have a baby in half an hour, we're gonna have to get the baby out.
Yeah, I'm listening and I'm wondering, back to that conversation that you had with your midwife when you were scared that you were going to poo, and she said, look, if you want to start pushing, you can start pushing. Were you, and you started pushing, and you're pushing again when you're at the hospital? Was this kind of like your body is asking you to push, your body's just, you're doing what your body is asking you to do? Or was this like, oh, this is this bit where I'm supposed to start pushing, so I'm gonna push? And then presumably in the helicopter, it didn't sound like you weren't talking about pushing while you're in the helicopter. So that's why I asked, is because it's sort of sounding like you were pushing because that's what you believed you were supposed to do, rather than that's because what your body was doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have since, spoken to other women or heard them talk about their body involuntarily pushing. And that's definitely not what this was. This was me actively pushing.
Okay.
Yep. All this time, my partner is not there yet, and I was like checking my phone to see where he was, and I do actually think that the midwife was sort of stalling to get him there, because I remember saying that he's in this place which is like half an hour away, and it just felt like she had enough empathy that she knew he needed to be there. So he arrived, and then whoever guy is like, oh well, this baby's not here, so we're gonna do the ventouse suction, pull the baby out. He didn't say it in those words, assist the birth, or something. And so they got me on my back, my feet in the stirrups, which was not a position that I had wanted to be in, this whole time. And there were lots of other people in the room. I remember he said as you push the baby out, the suction cup will just hold the baby there between contractions, so that you don't so the baby doesn't go back in, so you're like constantly making progress. Like, that's how it was sold to me. We'll just hold the baby there, and then with each push you'll like push the baby out more. And he said, oh, and I'm just going to put some anesthesia here in your vulva, because just in case we have to make a little cut. No, like, there was no question, no consent, no nothing. And they do not just hold the baby there, like, they pulled my daughter out of me. Like, it was, I think, probably just as traumatic, more traumatic for my partner, because he could see, he could see my head, and then he could see, whereas I couldn't see what was happening. I could just feel it. So they got her head there, and then he's like, oh, I'm just going to make this little cut, which was so painful. And then they pulled the baby out, and I had, I'd said I wanted delayed cord clamping and all this other stuff that just never happened. I said I didn't want the vitamin K injection. Oh, but something might happen, you should just have it anyway. And I got to hold her, and she was there, and she was a girl, and we didn't know she was a girl until she was born. And she latched, pretty fast, and having the episiotomy stitched up was more painful than the 2 days, beforehand. Really, really painful. And that was the birth story. Yeah. It was so far removed from what I had imagined.
Yeah.
That was a long story.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It needed to be the length it was. You really gave us a good sense of the entirety of the experience, not just the sequence of events, but what it was meaning to you at a heart level and an emotional level. So at what stage in the piece, Chloe, did you, and it might have been during, it might have been there and then, but for many it's not, realize that what you went through actually was not okay and was traumatic, and you deserved some processing and some healing from that experience. When did you connect those dots? Because for lots of people, you know, when they have a birth experience like that, they're kind of led to believe that, well, yeah, it was unfortunate, but that's just how birth often goes, you know, and at least you've got a healthy baby, and, you know, it could have been so much worse. And yeah, well done. You did great. Gosh, you know, congratulations. And so you're kind of left holding this experience that felt traumatizing, and yet nobody's talking about it like it could possibly be a traumatic event. Yeah.
I'd say it was pretty instant. I knew that I didn't feel how I'd expected or wanted or hoped to feel, and I was just so upset, like constantly. I would just spend, you know, huge chunks of the day crying, holding my daughter, and being so grateful that she was there, but just feeling this heavy sadness. And I did get all those comments, you know, like, oh, it could have been worse. Oh, it's lucky that you got to go to the hospital. Oh, isn't it great we've got the helicopters? Oh, blah, blah, blah. And I was sort of also telling myself those stories, like, oh, I am so grateful, and it could have been worse, and I didn't have to have a C-section, and I didn't die, and she didn't die. But still, like, I was saying those things, but I wasn't feeling any better. You know, they didn't make me feel better. And yeah, just this sadness that, like, I'd wanted to be a mum since I was a kid, and now I was, and it was awful. And I just kept replaying her birth, like the whole labor and birth was like on repeat in my mind, like all day for those early weeks. And then actually for the first year of her life, every time I went to bed, it was all I could think. Like, I would just replay the whole experience. What did I do wrong? What should I have done? What could I have done? So it was interesting. I actually looked through our messages, because I messaged you, Carla, and it was 2 weeks after my daughter was born that I messaged you, because I couldn't enjoy life. Like, I knew I couldn't carry on living and feeling that way. And I don't think I really told anyone. I didn't really tell anyone that. You know, I don't think I even said it that way to you, and I didn't tell my partner, and I didn't tell the midwife, because, you know, how could I tell her that, like, she was sort of responsible for making me feel this way? And although, you know, was she responsible? Well, I put myself in that situation. That's a whole nother. Yeah, it wasn't something I discussed with anyone, but I knew that I couldn't be a mother and feel like this. I was so sad and angry, and yeah. So 2 weeks.
Yeah, and what played out from there? Like, I don't recall our conversation. Yeah, hopefully I gave you some helpful next steps.
Yeah. Absolutely. I had messaged a woman who I knew who was a midwife, and I said, do you know, like, is there any support for birth trauma? Because I feel like that's what I've got. And she mentioned your name, and I messaged you, and I think you must have just been at the end of a healing birth practitioner training cohort, and you said, actually, I've got these trainees, you know, you can talk to one of them. And so I spoke to Emma, who is Empower Matrescence over in Australia. She was your first overseas practitioner. Yeah, and we set up this Zoom call, and And my daughter was tiny, you know, she was tiny, and my partner had to stay home and look after her so that I could talk to Emma. And, you know, she couldn't really go 2 hours without needing a feed. And so even the process of doing the video call was quite stressful and sort of a bit traumatizing. But I remember feeling this instant peace at having someone listen to my story and not say, oh, it could have been worse, or, oh, you're so lucky, really. She just listened and empathized and didn't try and fix it and make it better. And I just felt so much gratitude for that, for being heard.
Mm. But so many people, their trauma is really about not feeling seen and heard in their experience. And then it's further exacerbated when they have their experience invalidated through those comments. And they are well-meaning comments. People aren't saying these with the intent of trying to make you feel worse about how you do feel. When they say, you know, oh, well, at least you've got a healthy baby, and focus on the positives, and it could have been worse. So to have somebody hold that space for you to share your story and for you to be witnessed in all it was for you, to be heard and seen and acknowledged, that sounds really hard. I'm so sorry you went through that. Do you want to tell me anything more? You know, like, it's just, oh my gosh, like, I'm not crazy for feeling like I do. My feelings matter. Yes, I can feel grateful for my beautiful, healthy baby and simultaneously feel devastated about the way she was born and our start to our mother-daughter experience. And yeah, and just for the listeners, yeah, when I run a healing birth practitioner training course, it's a 10-week program, the final piece of the certification process is for these trainees to hold what I call a practice client session, which is where they run their own unraveling your trauma sort of session, like I would, with clients who come to me for healing. And in exchange for you offering feedback and a koha, donation of some sort to acknowledge the time and work that this person has put into working with you. So I would have said to you, that's an option. I mean, you could have worked with me. I just, you know, but yeah, so this comes around. I run these trainings sort of 3 times a year, and I put word out through social media, etc., that, hey, anybody who wants to have a session with one of my trainees, yeah, that offer's open. So yeah, you worked with the lovely Emma, who's yeah, and so then what? You shared your story with her. Was there anything else that you recall about that session?
Yeah, so she offered, I don't know what it's called, but it was a kind of a reprogramming, where you take a feeling about a certain situation and you get rid of that feeling and put a different feeling in its place. So that was a kind of guided exercise that we did. And then I think really that was kind of the beginning of the healing, but the rest of the healing came afterwards. It was like a door was opened for me that, yes, how you're feeling is valid, and yes, this is birth trauma, and a lot of women experience birth trauma, and this is why, and these are all the other ways that you can birth. It kind of opened my eyes to this other world. And then certainly I remember feeling so grateful for that I told myself, you know, my daughter was 2 weeks old. I was like, when she's older, I'm going to do this healing birth practitioner training because I want to offer this to other women. And I think you did the next course in the January, so she was like 2 months old, and I felt that was too soon. And then the next training was in June, and so I signed up for the healing birth practitioner training in June, which coincided with my mum being here, so she could help with my daughter in the evening, so I could do the course with you. And I vividly remember at the start of that course writing down in my notebook, I am not ready to hold space for women because I still need to heal my own trauma. Like it was still very much, it was too triggering for me. But doing the healing birth practitioner training, understanding physiological birth, understanding trauma, like by the end of that course, I just felt at peace, really, with what had happened and how it had happened and why it had happened. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. And this I know was only a piece of the learning and the healing journey you've been on. And I would love for you to share a bit about, I know that you've been running women's circles. I know that you've been diving into kind of women's cycles and honoring your cycles and all sorts of related stuff, because really, healing birth trauma is really about reclaiming ourselves as women and our innate capacity to birth our babies and to mother and to flow with the cycles of life and all the things that's all there. It's like I talk about, birth preparation and part of the healing journey as well is an unlearning and a remembering. And that unlearning is about unlearning all the bullshit we've been fed about our bodies and about who knows, who we ought to be seeking the answers from when we have, period pain or, problems conceiving or all the things, right? Like and so unlearning that conditioning, and I've kind of gotten used to using the term, it's gone from my head now. What's the term? Using the term grooming. I really feel like as women, we are groomed to be compliant patients in the medical arena. I was going to say in the birth space, but it extends long before birth, so that we, by the time we come into the birth space, into the birth room, we are, yes, of course, yes, doctor, no, doctor, vaginal examination here, like, let me spread my legs to you as a stranger and let you put your fingers inside me when I'm feeling incredibly vulnerable and in lots of pain, because you know what's best for me, and I just have to do what I'm told, and I'm the good girl. I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm not going to argue. Besides, I'm in a fucking state of trauma, and I don't have the capacity to. So yeah. So that's the unlearning piece, and the remembering is that it is all there, right? We are whole as we are. We have all the knowledge we need, within us. It's just a matter of peeling away the walls and the blocks and the conditioned responses and beliefs and that to access it. Yeah. And I talk about this, in our role as healing birth practitioners, birth healers, that we're not there to fix anybody or to heal anybody or to save or rescue anybody. We are there to help them to find that inner knowing, to help them to access their self-healer, to help them to see that their trauma wasn't their fault, and that birth can be different next time, and that healing is available to them. Yeah. So I went on a tangent there, but I would love to hear more about your learning and healing journey you went on, because I know that this, healing birth work that you did with Emma, and then the practitioner training was the beginning of a bigger picture for you.
Yeah, absolutely. The healing birth practitioner training taught me about holding space, about listening and supporting in a non-judgmental, non-fixing way. And I remember thinking, I don't know how receptive women here will be to being offered that space. It's a rural, conservative area with a low population. and the birth stories that I'd heard were very, oh, well, that's just how it is, oh, it was deeply traumatic, but that's just how it is. Oh, that's what you have to go through to get a baby. And so on the one hand, I thought, oh, I don't even know if I can offer this to people. But on the other hand, I was thinking, it's not just women who give birth who need space held for them. It's not just mothers. I actually think that I want to hold space for women more collectively. And I don't know, synchronicities, things come into your sphere of knowing when you're ready to receive them. And so certainly my Instagram feed just went from like farming and food to birth and women's circles and witches and menstrual cycles, and all this stuff was coming up that I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So the women's circles kind of ticked away in my brain as a little idea, or maybe I could do that, but like, who the hell is going to come, because I live in the middle of the wops. And I sort of put it like, oh, as a maybe. But before that had happened, I think the reconnection with my menstrual cycle was one of the real key shifts. I had been tracking my cycle in the 3 months before we conceived, and then I actually think I carried on tracking throughout my pregnancy. Even though I wasn't tracking my cycle, I was just tracking kind of my mood, how I'm feeling, noticing any changes in my bodies, things that needed noting. And I was waiting for my cycle to return postpartum. I didn't really have any kind of measure of when that would be. I breastfed my daughter, full time. So I was very aware that my cycle might not return for a long time, or it might come back. And interestingly, actually, before I tell that bit, my episiotomy scar was really painful, and my partner and I couldn't have penetrative sex for it felt like a long time. I mean, there was the start where I absolutely didn't want to, and then after that, when I did, we just couldn't. Like, it felt like, I don't know, it felt like he was trying to put his penis in like a hole in a pencil sharpener, like it was like a joke. Like, how is he ever going to get that in there? It just literally felt like the opening to my vagina was so small that it would never fit. And it would also, even just with that kind of gentle touch, it was so painful. And that was obviously, you know, incredibly triggering for me, because every time we tried to be intimate in that way, and you know, we like, there's lots of ways of having sex, but like sometimes we wanted that penetration, and every time it would just obviously bring back the whole birth experience, and so I was having to relive it, you know, over and over. And one day, just, it was the week that I was about to start the practitioner training with you, Carla, we were in bed and like, you know, trying to have sex, and I was like, well, you know, you can, you know, try, but just be gentle. And we achieved penetration, and it was painful, but it happened. And we went very slowly, and you know, I don't think we did it like that for very long because it was quite sore. And I, you know, I remember saying to him, oh my God, be careful, because I think I might be ovulating. And I just had this feeling that I was. Yeah, and sure enough, 2 weeks later, I got my first bleed postpartum. And that was really interesting to me, that all lined up together. Like intimacy, this penetration, my ovulation, and I think the emotional release that I felt knowing that I was going to do this training with you and do more work at healing that trauma that was all, you know, emotional, physical, all tied up together.
Yeah, like we talked about earlier with regards to the labor. Yeah, exactly the same. Yeah, and if there's anything else you are happy to share or want to share about postpartum sex, and as you went on that healing journey, did that kind of shift further? Like, is there anything you want to add about that?
Certainly up until that point, I had sort of avoided it because it felt really disappointing. I felt quite separate from that part of my body. And even, you know, even having my vulva touched, you know, kindly and gently and with love, it was still that body part that had been violated. And so I couldn't help but think. Yeah, and the episiotomy scarring took way longer than I anticipated to heal fully. Again, that was something no one, oh, it's just a little cut. And I firmly believed it was just superficial. I had no idea how deeply and through how many layers they cut, you know, that no one told me that. No one told me that I needed to rest. No one told me anything about the kind of management of that. And for a really long, well, probably even now still, like, I feel sad when I touch my own vagina and vulva where that scar is, because it's not how it was before, and that will never be the same. Yeah, and that does, you know, I don't think about it often, and I don't think about it now when I'm having sex, but if I am ever like touching myself to see where my cervix is, or just touching myself, like just to get to know that part of my body, and it just, I know I will always think about that now, because it's, yeah, there's a scar there and I can feel it, and that's really sad.
Did sex become more or less painful and more enjoyable as you went on the healing journey, or as that scar tissue softened, or is it still something that is a trigger for you? Is it still something that isn't what it was?
It certainly got easier and it got less painful. It took a long time. I mean, I'm not sure when, but there must have been a moment where, oh, like, we're having penetrative sex and it doesn't hurt, like it actually just feels good. But that took a long time. yeah, and I don't know, it's not triggering for me now. I don't really think about it unless I'm consciously thinking about it.
Mhm. Take us back to talking about, beginning tracking your cycles, or it sounds like you kind of had continued to do that, but then of course your cycle resumed. And and what journey did that take you on?
So cycle tracking had my first ovulation and my first bleed, and I had just always done my cycle tracking on paper in a book. I really liked being able to see my whole cycle on one page. And at that time, I was cycle tracking in a circle. So you like draw a circle and split it into 28 or however many day little segments. And that was just a method where I would write 1 or 2 words, each to frustrated or ovulating, grumpy, happy, creative, whatever. But I found it a really nice way to begin to see patterns in how I was feeling. And I would just like to add this because I've been talking to a friend who's just got her cycle back after having a baby. She's 8 weeks postpartum and her cycle has returned. And we were talking about how you feel at certain points in your cycle. And I said to her, I didn't feel like I got the full expression of the different parts of my cycle until I stopped breastfeeding. So although I had about 1.5 years where I was cycling and I was going through these peaks and troughs, they weren't really accentuated until I stopped breastfeeding. So I should probably just say there for anyone listening who doesn't know much about cycle tracking or what I'm talking about, peaks and troughs, there's an idea that you can split your menstrual cycle into kind of 4 quarters, which equate to the seasons of the year. And roughly winter is your bleeding time, you transition into spring, summer is your ovulation, and then you go into autumn back into your winter and your bleeding time. And yeah, I didn't notice the strength of probably the summer bit, that kind of creative ovulation, social, energetic type of feeling. I didn't really get that strongly until I stopped breastfeeding, which I wouldn't have known if I hadn't been tracking my cycle. So the cycle tracking for me was kind of after realizing that birthing in the system can be traumatic and is not necessarily designed to support women, but is designed to support the medical system. That was like the first awakening, aha. And then reclaiming my menstrual cycle was kind of the second awakening, aha. Here's this thing that all women are doing for a huge chunk of their lives, like years and years of your life is spent bleeding. And, there's a whole cycle, but that does tend to be the bit that we focus on is the bleed. Because it's the bit that's visible, I suppose, and it's the bit that people are shamed for. And, there's this thing that's happening to women and we're not talking about it and we're not aware of it. Even as women who are experiencing it, we don't know what we're experiencing. So that was huge. And I found, or sort of refound, because some of this information had come up for me before and I'd not really held on to it. So Jane Hardwick Collins, her work was really pivotal for me. Birth work, pregnancy work, bleeding work. That was a huge eye-opener. So those were the kind of those aha moments. And then I had decided that I wanted to run women's circles. What was that going to look like? And my daughter was about to turn 1 by this point, and we were between houses and it was all a bit chaotic. And I'd said, once we move and settle into what is this house, then I will run women's circles. And I just kind of had to put a deadline on myself because I come up with ideas and I don't follow through. And that's a that's a conditioning, you know, like you're not good enough kind of conditioning. Yeah. And so weirdly, the month that I turned 30 was the month that I held my first women's circle. And my daughter was a year and 4 months. So I felt like I'd finally sort of landed in motherhood. It had taken a really long time. Yeah, it was like I was finally a woman. Like I turned 30 and just the truth of the world kind of went boom, like, oh, okay, now I understand. And it's been a really overwhelming journey ever since.
Yeah. How did your first women's circle go? Did you have anybody turn up?
Yeah, yeah,
What?
yeah. So I actually, for that first circle, I put it out to the world, but I also approached women who I thought might be receptive to it. And I can't remember. I think maybe there were 8 of us for that first circle. And at that stage, I was holding them monthly. So it was a Sunday afternoon because that fitted in best with me. Like I couldn't do evenings. So Sunday afternoon worked well. And I knew it also worked well for others who had children. And I was holding them monthly. And then that was March. By the time I got to September, my kind of vision for them had shifted slightly and my own belief system had shifted. And yeah, I don't know if it's motherhood or if it's turning 30 or if it's whatever, like all these awakenings, but I became quite a lot more spiritual than I had ever been. I think I grew up in a house where religion wasn't spoken highly of. I had been to some sort of Christian schools and never really paid any attention to the teachings. I liked the hymns, but that was about it. Yeah, and my parents, my dad certainly, and in hindsight, gosh, $1 for every time I've said hindsight in this episode. My mum is more spiritual, but I think she kept it hidden. So anyway, to the outside world as a family or like my parents' teachings, it was kind of, if you can't explain it, if it's not backed by science or academia, then it's not really valid, or that's at least how I interpreted it. And I definitely think that as a child, I was probably a bit more spiritual. I think all children are a lot more open and receptive, and then they get told that that's not okay and they shut off those parts of themselves. Yeah, so sort of gone back towards a sort of spirituality more recently. And I felt like as I was exploring this spirituality in my personal life, I wanted to share that in the women's circles. And it has been quite important for me that the women's circles are inclusive. You know, you don't have to be of a certain faith or spirituality or religion to come. So I was always aware of that. I didn't want it to be me dictating. It was just like, okay, this is kind of how I'm living at the moment. These are some rituals that I do, or this is how I'm honoring the passing of time. You know, if you want to, you can, but you also can have your own beliefs, and you can also not do this at home if you don't want to. So I felt really called to live in line with the pagan wheel of the year, which is, it's a way of celebrating the passing of the seasons. It's a kind of nature-based spirituality. A lot of witches follow the wheel of the year. And I think especially because I'm living on a land that's not mine, and I'm living in seasons that don't go at the same time as what I'm used to. So an example of this is that my birthday is in March, and in the UK, my birthday always came at the time when the daffodils were just flowering. Well, now my birthday's autumn, and I felt like I didn't have that to hold on to. And so by observing these shifts in nature, it's kind of helping to tie me to this place. In a way that the calendar just doesn't do it for me. I think it's too linear. It's too masculine. It's too structured and regimented. New Year's Day, what's your New Year's resolution? And if you haven't achieved something by the end of December, like that's the year gone. And we're just forever going, oh, another month's gone. Oh, another month's gone. Oh, it's that month already. And since I've dropped into this wheel of the year, which is 8 celebrations throughout the year, so the solstices, the equinoxes, and then 4 in between, it just feels like my life has slowed down. And they're all dates that have a relevance in the natural world. The solstices, the longest and shortest days, like they happen and they're actual days, so celebrate them rather than the 1st of March. Like, what's the 1st of March? It's just a date. So I now run my women's circles in line with the wheel of the year. So instead of 12, one a month, it's now 8, and then roughly every 6 or 7 weeks. And as far as I know, no one has stopped coming because of that shift. It might not be their personal belief, that might not be how they choose to see the year, but they still come.
Yeah. Do you feel like this has been part of your healing journey through the trauma of your entry into motherhood, or your transition from sort of maid into mother? Do you feel like this too has been part of that healing?
Yeah, I do. I think that as a culture, and when I say as a culture, I mean anything that's kind of Eurocentric or descended from colonization from Europe, we are detached from nature. And I think that the detachment from nature is synonymous with the detachment from mother. Like, it's one and the same. If you don't respect mothers and you don't respect nature. And so this whole process for me has been about connecting with nature, connecting with myself, connecting with my needs, valuing myself, valuing the earth. It's a real kind of harmony, I guess. And a huge part of it all has been that I don't want my daughter, I mean, she's free to make her own choices, of course, but I don't want her to live a life of detachment like I have until this point. Or rather, I do want her to live, in line with her own inner truth and valuing the world that we live in. And if I have any sons, I want them to value and respect women and mothers. And it's been a whole birth was the catalyst for this whole, I don't even know what word to use. I had no idea that it's almost an unraveling, Carla. Like it's totally broken me down and built me back up. I've built myself back up.
I love if we think about, we often refer to Mother Earth, right? And we need to protect Mother Earth so that she can continue to feed us and nurture us and house us and all of those things. We are so dependent on on nature, on Mother Earth for our well-being, and so we need to care for her and respect her. And likewise, yeah, like you pointed out, that's synonymous with us as mothers. We need to nurture ourselves, have our needs met, be honoured for the vital role we play in nurturing the well-being of the children of the earth, of humanity. So I love this, and I love the lessons that you are imparting, the gifts you are giving your daughter through embodying the very thing that you are saying is important. When we model to our children that our needs are important, and that we yeah, it's right that we put ourselves and our needs first when that's what's necessary, rather than saying, there has been much too much of this, the epitome of a good mother as a sacrificial mother, as a mother who gives to everybody else before she'd give to herself. Like, that's the selfless mother, or that word selfless. Like, gosh, what are we teaching our daughters or our children when we say that a selfless, or we imply through our actions that selflessness is somehow something that needs to be revered, and and a good goal? No, when mothers have their needs honoured and met, they have everything within them already to be able to sustain their babies, and to raise them in love. And so let's get back to focusing, because I think in Western culture, postpartum, there's so much focus on the baby, and so little care and concern given to the mother's well-being. And if we just honoured her needs, then baby would be sweet.
Absolutely. And I think, this is one of the things I've been learning with tapping into living in line with my cycle and with the seasons of nature. And it's not easy, because if you've been brought up not doing it, you have to remove all these layers of conditioning. But one of the things that I learnt was that each time we bleed, each month, we're being invited to rest. Like, we're being invited to nurture ourselves and rest. And if you practice doing that before you become a mother, then when postpartum comes around, like, you've done it before, and the people in your life have seen you do it, and they know what that is. But for so many women, postpartum is the first time that they've ever either not been able to do something, or not wanted to, or feeling like they should do this, should do that. Like, it's so not in our nature. Actually, no, it probably is in our nature, but it's not in our teaching. And I think that I'm feeling, I didn't know if I wanted to support mothers or if I wanted to support women in birth. And now I'm realizing that, like, it starts way before that. We need to be feeling confident and powerful from, this big. And when we get our first bleed, and when we go through our teenage years, and when it happens way before. But for many, me and, lots of others, the birth experience and that initiation into motherhood is the catalyst. It's like the, oh shit, everything I've been living for the last 10, 15, 20 years is not optimal, and perhaps and now I need to do something.
Yeah, I mean, I said it at the start of this interview, but I can't wait to hear your next birth story, how that all unfolds, with this new found love and honoring for yourself as a woman and a mother, and like knowing what you need in order for that experience to be what it rightfully needs to be. And I'm talking about your next pregnancy and birth and postpartum journey. It's all there now. You've got it. And yeah, so I know you're looking forward to getting pregnant again, when the stars align, when the timing is right for the next little baby to inhabit your womb. So yeah, like, let's get you back on the podcast one day and have you share that next story and come full circle with us. In the meantime, if people are inspired by what you're sharing, like, do you offer, like, yeah, even just to follow Chloe on her Instagram page if you are inspired by what she's talking about here? Because gosh, I've just been so loving. You're an amazing writer, and I learned recently that you are a beautiful singer as well, and lyricist. So you've been creating these beautiful songs, and yeah. But is there any way that people, apart from those who live in the box with you and attend your circles that you hold, is there any other ways for people to work with you, or is there anything you want to share about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I ran my first workshop a few months ago, and that was an introduction to the menstrual cycle. So I envisaged that was for someone who has a menstrual cycle and maybe doesn't really know anything about it, or wants to connect more with their womb. And the replay is available for that. And then off the back of that, I had some feedback that women would like workshops on more specific aspects of the menstrual cycle. And I've also had quite a few people interested in learning more about the wheel of the year and kind of seasonal rituals. If you end up on my Instagram page, at the moment it's slightly chaotic because I am multi-passionate and I don't feel ready to zone in on one specific thing. And so there's bits of menstrual cycles, and there's bits of paganism and witchcraft, and there's bits of nature, and there's bits of motherhood, and kind of all sorts. But it's a reflection and expression of where I am at the moment and the things that are teaching me. And as you said, the odd song, a little bit of writing. It's I think a huge part of this for me, and you would have noticed it coming up in my birth story, is around shame. And so I am trying really hard to show all parts of myself, because I think the bits that we keep hidden are the bits that feed that shame monster, and certainly all those things I've mentioned. I would never have shared a video of me singing before I gave birth to my daughter. And, they're not, you wouldn't think they're directly related, but like that was something I felt shame about. And I wasn't able to stand in my power. So I share all sorts on my Instagram because it's a conscious decision for me to let go of the ideas of what we can and can't share.
Yeah, beautiful. What's your Instagram page called? I'll link it in the show notes, but it's got the word reclaiming in it, I'm sure.
Yes, it's Reclaiming Her Power, all one word.
Perfect. Oh, Chloe, this has been, wow, what a gift. Thank you so much. It's been really special for me to hear your story. I knew snippets. Thank you for taking us, through that really vulnerable journey of yours, and for all the beautiful sharing about the healing path you've been on. And thank you for the gifts you offer in terms of the work that you're doing and the sharing that you are doing on your social media pages and here on this podcast.
Oh, thank you, Carla. That was great. Yeah.